What is up with albums being completely, utterly depressing these days? But is this new Squid album any good?
I see snap.
Squid's latest album, Coward. This is the third studio album from Brighton-based Bristol-based, Brighton-raised post-punk quintet. The album consists of 9 tracks with a total runtime of about 45 minutes. Musically, Cowards makes a departure from Squid's previous work, Bright Green Field in 2021 and Oh Monolith in 2023, I believe. Their previous albums felt somewhat heavier, whereas Cowards incorporates elements of folk, jazz, psychedelica, and electronic music to create a more in-depth and actualized sound. The band has described Cowards as an album about evil, delving into themes of wrongdoing and moral complexity, topics that kind of feel particularly relevant today anyway, with people seemingly becoming more self-serving, and it also explores the notion that evil is somewhat inherent in all of us. Lead vocalist and drummer Ollie Judge has described the album as a book of dark fairy tales. But this isn't entirely new territory for the band. Even in previous albums, they've tackled the dark clouds of capitalism and Britain's slow but sure descent into right-wing politics. Britain is doomed. All layered over their signature post-punk guitar music. Oh Monolith also touched on police brutality, British folklore, rats, and you'll see some familiar sort of themes in this album, starting with the track Crispy Skin. The album's lead single is inspired by a dystopian novel. Tender is the Flesh by Agostina Bazterrica, pronunciation bad me, always. Sorry, which explores theme as cannibalism as a societal norm. Perhaps this suggests that as a nation we're slowly consuming ourselves. Or maybe they just really like the book. I'm not an English teacher. Either way, with lyrics like "it's become so easy to take a life," it's clear that nothing good is happening to anyone in this album. I've always found Squid sound quite interesting, whether you call it post-punk or alternative indie, and that's kind of exactly what you hear on Crispy Skin. Right from the start, this synth-led intro sounding like a sped up Bubba O'Reilly, while sporadic vocals seem to taunt you from left to right. Then scattered guitarists sort of make way for this really heavy, nice bass, and Ollie's signature vocals then come in, which kind of, as always, carry this real air of mystery. One thing I always listen for is the use of space, how a band utilizes those narrow edges of the sonic spectrum, and Squid really do this quite beautifully here, balancing guitars and synths effectively. A brief silence midway through forces you to take note of the vocals before the instrumental sweeps back in, making its return even sweeter. And just as you think you've had all your treats, the last minute or so introduces this really unsettling horror-inspired strings. Despite its length, the track stays engaging throughout, with enough variation to keep things kind of interesting, and that sense of intrigue continues with Building 650, inspired by the band's first trip to Japan. The song seemingly follows a guy named Frank, with the narrator making excuses for his behaviour. A reoccurring theme in Cowards, actually, is the way we kind of judge wrongdoing while simultaneously excusing our own behaviour, or even feeling morbid curiosity towards dark events. Blood on the Boulders, for example, referencing the evil of like the Manson murders, but uses them as a critique of our cultural obsession with true crime. The song's midway refrain, "We return to the scene," captures this fascination with like real life horror, reflecting on how we as the audience like crave these gory details. One thing I noticed is how tight everything sounds in terms of production and mix. The drums are really punchy, the high-pitched guitars are gritty, and the vocals, especially on Building 650, feel really energetic and quite confident, especially compared to earlier tracks anyway. The dynamic transformation of sound is something you hear throughout the album. A song might start soft and controlled, only to morph into something more heavy and chaotic. Blood on the Boulders again, for example, amplifies this, beginning with quiet restraint, before erupting into an aggressive, almost frenzied climax. However, there are kind of moments where the album loses me a little bit. Some tracks feel vague or lackluster. The title track, Cowards, for example, is quite underwhelming in both vocal delivery and instrumentation. Similarly with Fieldworks I, which features this harpsichord that just kind of drowns everything out when it's playing, and when it isn't at the forefront, not much is really happening either. That is to say, until the final minute, where things start to just pick up, feeling really, really big. And there's a whirlwind of strings and these ghostly voices. And that all changes in Fieldworks II, stepping things up a little bit here, which introduces this clockwork like percussion. Kind of immediately fills you with dread anyway. Lyrically, it's dark, painting images of blood, death, drowning. And the music really mirrors this in a really kind of smart way. These crashing waves of the kick drum and these sort of sharp jarring crashes of the cymbals. A bit theatrical with it, and I like it. This is followed by Cro-Magnon Man, whose sort of anxious jittery guitar riffs reflect that of early Man, which, you know, references the title, which is this like prehistoric early European people who lived back in the day or what. While I do like this track, the sort of higher frequencies do get a bit overbearing as we kind of reach the last couple of songs. Showtime has these intentional, kind of pretentious vocals singing about the downsides of fame. Musically, I find it really interesting. At one point, there's these bleeps and bloops sort of resembling a computer game or something, and then these start to speed up more and more, layered with swelling strings, leading into this sort of psychedelic whirlwind of percussion and noise. The track builds this like intensity until Ollie's final words, "I just laugh." Yeah, one of the album's sort of standout moments for me. Finally, we close with Well Met, Fingers Through the Fence, an 8-minute track which does manage to stay somewhat interesting thanks to this sort of like intricate arrangement that's going on. The disorienting harpsichord and these like clicking sounds create a really sort of eerie atmosphere, whilst this horn-like instrument and these vocals add a kind of warmth, folky feel to it. I'm not 100% sure, but I think the track might be about like us destroying the planet with like littering and that sort of thing. A particular highlight of this track is when the harpsichord has a bit of a solo, paired with these whispering vocals. Really reminds me of Imogen Heap. The track ultimately builds into an explosion of sound before fading into a delicate kind of percussive outro. I think Cowards is quite ambitious and it's quite an unsettling listen, reinforcing Squid's knack for blending experimental with thought-provoking. There are some moments here and there that do feel less inspired than others. The album's like ability to sway between eerie and sort of chaotic keeps it really engaging. Thematically, it's quite deep, as however deep you want to see it anyway, exploring morality, human nature, and societal decay. It adds an extra layer to this already dense instrumentation. Squid are continuing to push their sound, sounding different every single time it feels. Yeah, all in all, I think it was a really great listen, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment, whatever you like, and hopefully catch you on the next one.